I am delighted today to have with us for this new episode of the Kipling Balance, Manny Maceda. Manny Maceda, you pronounce in English. Manny is a quite well-recognized business leader for many, many years. During the last 6 years, he has been the worldwide CEO of Bain Company. And I am delighted, Manny, to have you here and to share with us this session to talk about many different things. Of course, we will start talking about the poem, the If poem that we like so much by Rudyard Kipling. And then we will have the opportunity to talk about many different things on leadership, on business, on the world. So welcome, Manny, and we are delighted to have you here with us today.
Well, Pablo, I'm both honored and actually excited to be here. And I'm grateful you invited me. I've been a fan, not just of this poem from my childhood, but of your own leadership as a great CEO yourself. So it's a privilege for me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll talk about many interesting points. As you know, we organize these sessions and we ask you to select from this wonderful poem some verses, and then we start the conversation talking about that. So I will come to, first of all, to your first selection. It's very difficult always to decide what to choose,
Yes.
no? Because whenever I read the poem, I know it by heart, and whenever I read it, I find so every sentence is great, and it makes sense also the globality of the poem, no? What it means when you read it fully. But coming back to your selection, the first one you have selected is one of my favorites, by the way, I can tell you, is if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch. Yes. Why, Manny? What does this verse mean to you? Why have you selected this one?
Well, thank you for starting with that. I first read this poem in grade school, in elementary school in Manila. It's a poem that's studied around the world. And those two lines are related, but they're actually a little bit different. And, it comes down to, like many of us, your earliest influence in life are your parents. And I happen to have two parents who were different from each other. They came from different backgrounds. My father was a politician in the Philippines. That's what he wanted to do. And so I grew up watching him talk to crowds. And it's hard to talk to crowds without getting caught up in what the crowds want to hear, in the adulation, but to actually be intentional on what you're trying to say, what you're trying to communicate. For me, that was always, I didn't know that someday I would talk to crowds too. But that was part of it. And then the issue of both being able to talk to kings while not losing the common touch. Again, that was anchored in what I didn't know then, but my mother always taught me especially in hierarchical societies, which can be societies or organizations. To be able to talk to CEOs as peers, even if you're not one, or a king if you're not one, is a challenging thing. You have to visualize yourself as someone who can be their peer. It's just as hard when you're already the CEO or you're a senior person, a partner in a consulting firm. My mother became a CEO. My father became a senator in the Republic of the Philippines. But to always have them tell me, every person, to some degree, we're all equal. We're all citizens of the world. And they all reserve our respect. And so I've tried to live my life where, you don't judge an organization, a person based on where they stand in an organization. We're all teammates. Everyone is worthy of, in the Philippines, my mother, I said, be gracious. And I talked today about being grateful. Those are very related. And so for me, that's, every time I act that way, my parents have both passed away. I still remember some of the words that my mother taught me.
I have had the same education, Manny, and I fully agree with what you are saying. I think this is key from many different points of view, and also to this idea that substantially we are all equal, that you are not below anybody, but you are not above anybody, that we are all equal. And then in business, I think this also has to do with not being arrogant, with being humble, with being authentic, which I think also for a business leader, it is key in whatever organization, this idea of not being arrogant, that you can walk with kings, but you never have to lose the common touch. And if you lose the common touch, you are completely lost. And then the first verse, as you were saying, also being authentic, not lying, not telling people what they want to hear, but being honest in what you say. I think that these things are all extremely relevant also for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me, the second part, as your career evolves, walking with kings is arguably the harder thing to do. So there's almost a life cycle evolution, you know, in my business, in consulting, where people ask me, well, how do you try to guide and give advice to a great CEO like Pablo or Phil Knight or Charles Schwab or Michael Dell from the United States? And says, well, if you're intimidated right away, you know, they're the CEO, they're billionaires, they've built these great organizations. How can you try to? So earlier in career, it's harder to say if you can walk with kings, but you have to have the mindset, you know, well, there are other things that I will contribute to this organization. You know, my study of business, my perspective, my experiences. The first part of your career, that's the harder part. Mm-hmm. And then you go up in an organization and suddenly you're the peer. Yep. And not to lose the common touch. So it's sort of this constant evolution of ourselves as we go through our lives that makes this. We're still talking about this, you know, I'm in my 60s and I read this poem, you know, probably when I was 8-10 years old. And
have you seen, of course, not to say which ones, but have you seen cases of CEOs losing the common touch in your experience? Yes,
I do. And it's not just CEOs, you know, the term is kings, right?
Kings,
we have much more direct experience. But as CEOs, we see leaders of governments, of educational institutions. So you will, it's a little bit a sad thing if you see that they used to have the common touch and then you become to lose it because you have the trappings of power. You know, one of the things in my organization that matters a lot is, you know, we don't have kings. In fact, you introduced me as a CEO. We don't even have a CEO. I'm the CEO. Our title is managing partner.
Managing partner, yeah.
And it's intended to be a rotational assignment. So for the last 6.5 years, I have played the role of being the managing partner, our CEO. I just finished 2.5 weeks ago. At the end, I hand it off to somebody else. It's your turn. So even as organizations, you can build institutional processes so that you don't become like the bad king who just wants to stay in power as long as they can. And I do think organizations can try to build cultures that live up to this part of coupling.
And when people ask me about what could you do in terms of how to organize a company structure, I always say that for me something that always works is to have the organization as flat as possible.
Yes.
What does it mean having a flat organization? It depends very much on the company, the sector, the moment in the life of the company. So there are many, many different elements, but always with the mindset of the organization being as flat as possible, not being very hierarchical, so being as flat as possible as a concept. You are talking about an organization which is a partnership. So I assume that this is because when you have a very flat organization, it has a lot of advantages. I think the advantages are many more than the disadvantages, but there are also disadvantages in order to coordinate decisions, in order to... but in a partnership, it must be even more difficult, not to be...
Yes, so I think there's probably 2 points there I'll address. a flatter, a less hierarchical
Yeah.
organization, which makes the delta between the king
Yeah.
and the front line, I do think makes it easier to live this culture of values. And it's harder, so I'll come back to that. The other thing we do organizationally, when we draw an organizational chart, we don't draw it this way, right? The typical organizational chart, the king, the CEO's on top, CEO -1, CEO -2. It's flipped. The top of the organization is why we exist as an organization. It's our customers, So that's on top. We call them clients in our industry. Right underneath them, who are the people serving the customers? It's the frontline teams working with our clients. That could be true in banking and law and advertising. And then you have the management whose job is to make it easier for our client-serving teams to serve their customers. And down at the bottom of the pyramid is the servant leader managing partner who's looking up. And my job is to make the rest of your jobs easier so that our customers. So it's a little flatter for sure, but it's also oriented 180 degrees in the opposite direction.
But this is also something very familiar to me because this is a second advice that I always give, and it is try the corporate center not to grow.
Yes.
Because what I always is the obsession, the corporate center to be servicing the business units, the people that deal with the customers, and not like a superstructure controlling everything and then being like oppressing the people who are really. So the corporate center is completely necessary because you need to have all the functions of finance, HR, all the different functions that you have in IT, of course, that you have inside a company, but not to be so big that it's to support the organization, not to control, and not to have too many internal reporting. So try to make things as simple as possible from that point of view. This concept of less is more that I have always believed in very, very strongly, always in any organization.
Well, I'm with you on that, Pablo. And as a partnership, you said, well, it's harder to manage partners without the hierarchy. If you have common values, you can influence and team. But partnerships generally don't like lots of overhead. They don't like, the functions have to support them to make lives easier to serve our customers. So I'm in full agreement to that one. Yeah.
Let us move to the second verse that you have selected. And it is this one: if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. What does this mean to you, Manny?
Well, I picked this one because it's become much more timely in the last few years. This is what's happening in our society, in our world. It varies a little bit country to country. But it's very hard to be a corporate leader now because of all the stakeholders out there. It could be your customers, it could be your employees, it could be your regulators, it could be your competitors, it could be your suppliers. Now, all part of a world that is polarizing with very different agendas. So you could say, I'm going to be intentional on my language. But so much of the world out there now has sadly closed their mind a little bit because they will filter what you say based on a little bit what they want to hear, what their beliefs are. So for me, what it's become practically is to be very thoughtful on what I say. Candidly, Pablo, in some cases, not to speak. That you can argue, we can debate that to say, is this a position where I don't need to take a position? And especially as CEOs, you're not just talking for yourself, you're speaking on behalf of an organization. So in today's society, I've tried to be thoughtful. Sometimes less is more. It's not an abdication of responsibility. It recognizes we have diverse customers, we have diverse teams. You have to have a wide tent. And then very practically, I've used this rule now. I call it the 20-60-20 rule. It's different from the 80-20 rule. What do I mean by that? I said to some degree, I kind of know that 20% of my organization, let's call it my partners, will probably think I'm doing too much, and 20% think I'm doing too little, and 20% might think I'm going too fast, and 20% think I'm going too slow, and 20% might think you should take a position in this industry. I came into this role maybe naively hoping I could get 80, 90, 100% alignment on anything, and now, if you can get 60, that's why I say it's 20-60-20, that's actually pretty good. And if you could mobilize the majority to go in the direction, there's a pragmatism I've learned to that, even if you have a vision. And I came into my job, like most CEOs, with a vision, with a plan, with an intentionality. This is how I want to take my organization from here to here. Would anybody want the organization to be 100% behind you? Yes, but it's hard to get. If you can get 20-60-20, I think that's pretty good. And so a lot of that is what you say and how the organization now is prepared to hear it or not.
I think what you are saying, well, you have mentioned this vision and pragmatism that I will come back later because it's something that I have heard you before talking about, and I like very much that concept. But before moving to that, and regarding what you were saying right now, I sometimes I say, and I try to apply this always, I don't know if it's the best translation into English, but it is that I say what I think, so I never lie, but I think what I say. So
Yes.
So this is something that when you are a leader in any organization, so you should never lie. What you say is really what you think, but you should sometimes, you always need to think about what you are going to say. So it is, you cannot be saying, well, but this is my position. Well, but yes, you need to be careful because you have an organization behind you. So it's something that you need to be conscious about.
I fully agree with that. And the ad, maybe the implication of the second part, I say what I think, but I'll think. It's not just thinking what you say, it's thinking if you actually have to say something.
Yeah.
And I do think that's
No, and that part that you were mentioning before, I have seen myself sometimes in situations that it's better not to say anything publicly for the company. So this is what is key for any company and for any leader at any level in any organization is never to lie. That is
yes.
And this is something because if not, this is the end, of any. But this doesn't mean that sometimes it's better not for a company not to have a position about this or about that.
Well, and the difference between a position, even in the Kipling quote about words, actions actually speak louder than words. Yeah. So what matters often is what the company does. Now, and then if you say what you say, even that, what you say to your teammates, what you say to your employees, that matters because often that reinforces action, that emphasizes the values that you want the company to have. It doesn't mean we need to go out and make a public statement or post something on our website or LinkedIn and Facebook that our company is taking this position. Because what matters is, well, what can you actually do as a company to make change happen, to make a difference? And so I actually do think actions speak louder than words.
Yes, fully.
But your comment, if you are going to use words, think about what you say and if you have to say it.
Yeah. And you have mentioned twice, but you have talked about values, about how relevant is this for you? You have been advising the most relevant companies in the world. I wanted, for me, it's key, values, culture of a company, but in your experience, because you are probably one of the persons in the world with more experience about many different corporations all over the world in many different sectors. Your experience shows that it makes a big difference, companies with values, with a strong culture. What's your experience, Manny?
Well, I do, and obviously you've led a very values-based company yourself, and we're doing this podcast at a very values-based institution, right? I.e., university, and so I absolutely believe values matter. It might be even very sharp for a company like mine because, for talent-based companies, if you think about it, our product is us. Our product is not a watch or a sneaker or clothes or a cell phone or a car. People are buying advice, partnership, perspective from individuals. And so for talent-based organizations, values are what allow you to attract, develop, retain, promote your product, even though I don't mean to
I understand.
desensitize it, that people, it's who we are. And so, as I've done transformation with clients in many industries, in many geographies in the world, you could say, well, there's sort of a standard playbook to transformation. It's never that standard, but it does start. Is there a mission or purpose that you're trying to achieve? Do you have a strategy to achieve that mission over time? The mission might be timeless. The strategy might take 1, 2, 3 years to implement, about customers, about your capabilities. But do you have a set of values that define your culture to make the organization self-propagate? And so for organizations like ours, I joined a firm that was very value-based. And then if you have the chance to be the CEO, as I did 6.5 years ago, to really take an effort to strengthen that value set. Because it turns out the right values, it could be a real source of competitive advantage. And that's an interesting perspective too, because, we used to have this debate, is our culture a fragile piece of glass that you have to protect? Or is it a diamond that can actually be used to build? And, as I took the firm on a much larger agenda, including acquiring other companies, bring it in to expand into different industries and different products and different capabilities, to have a set of values that could withstand that stretching. That's why I felt it was so important to do. And we in our firm we have 5 operating principles that define our core values, and we sort of, all of us know what each of those 5 mean. And I think I can connect the dots to having good values, to having a more loyal organization. And for a company whose product is people, the more loyal you have, the longer people stay, the better your business model is. Then we also find there is a correlation between customer loyalty and talent loyalty. You probably know, you don't want people who are constantly revolving. You want people that you build trust with. So then you can connect the dots all the way to customer strategy, that being a values-based organization builds a more talent and loyal workforce, which gets you more loyal customers, and then it's self-reinforcing.
But what you were mentioning before, because you say culture, the culture of a company, it's something very fragile that you need to protect, not to be destroyed, or is it a diamond? For me, it's clearly an asset to have a strong culture and the adequate one, and it's a clear asset. But at the same time, when you are leading an organization, so I would say it's somewhere in between, because depending on what decisions you take, you could be damaging the culture of the company.
Yes.
So it is something, and when you have a strong set of values, a strong culture inside a company, I think it makes a huge difference in terms of the commitment of the people, in terms of the sense of ownership of the different managers, in in the different areas of the company. So I think it makes a huge difference. If you think about the long-term performance of the company, it makes a huge difference. So it's a combination. It's something which you cannot say is fragile, but at the same time, you need to be aware of that, not to take any decision, even if it could be a good decision from a pure profit and loss account, but not to take any decision that could damage this culture of the company, these values of the company. Is something that when you are running a company, you also need to have in mind, in my opinion.
It's one of the harder choices, I think, as leaders. Like any other asset, it requires reinvestment. It requires nourishing. And you're dealing with a culture asset. There might be periods you say, I'm going to harvest it a little bit. You know, and some of the things that happen, if you think about what we all went through as a world, as organizations during COVID. But there, if you have and so you're just changing time perspectives. In the long run, if you think of this as an asset that is the source of competitive advantage, then of course, you have to constantly invest in it and nourish it.
And also having that in mind on another perspective, for example, when you say the growth of a company year after year, of course, for each company is different, depending on many different things. But there is, I don't know what expression to use, but there is a natural or a level of growth that is very healthy for the company from every point of view. But sometimes if you grow too much, too quickly, you could damage a lot the company and the business model and the long-term prospects. I think it has also a lot to do with this idea of having in mind the long term and the short term at the same time.
Absolutely.
Which I think both are combined, because short term is extremely relevant, but then having a view, thinking about the long term. And you see companies that sometimes that perhaps growing too quickly in too many different markets, and then you are damaging the core of the company.
If you're harvesting the asset to where you damage the core, then you sort of lost the plot. And part of the value of being a partnership is if you have a mindset, as we do, you know, we are custodian of an asset while we're responsible for leading it. Our predecessors built this. Our responsibility is to make it better so that the asset is healthier for the successors, for the next generation. So I actually think the long term has to trump it. Now, we all have to make short-term decisions. It comes with the territory.
And it's key. It's not only because of being public or being listed. It is because a big element to win the long term is also the short term.
Yes.
But always having in mind the long term. So it's when you are running a company or a division inside a company, is something that I think you always need to have in mind. This combination between long term and short term and medium term. No, sometimes I also say that the ideal, it depends on the type of company. It has nothing to do with what I was saying before, but is when you are a big company, but you started as a small company, that depending on the sector, for example, in retailing, this always happens, that you start with one store, and if you are very successful 40 or 50 years later, you are a big company, but you need to keep this mentality of being at the same time a small company, a medium-sized company, and a big-sized company.
Having perspective on your company's history, and this is where some longevity, some longitudinal shared memory matters. You know, my company is 52 years old, but some of us remember when we almost ceased to exist 31 years ago. You know, and we were basically bankrupt and the company had to get restarted. And if you go through that experience, it's there, and it's a good reminder. So when we were small, we call it, you know, remember when we were still led by our founders, when we were medium, now we're big. And it's a very interesting thought, you know, the king and common touch issue, if you applied to the big giant company, you know, Inditex, but you can still think of yourself as the common touch. You think about Kipling applied to organizations, not just to individuals. It matters too,
Manny, we could keep talking for a long time, but we are running out of time. But I wanted to ask you two things before finishing this conversation. The first one has to do with your life. How do you manage work-life balance, being so busy, traveling that much? And the second one, as far as we are at IE University, what advice would you give to students, people studying their undergraduates, their graduates, thinking about their professional life after finishing their studies? I would mention these two topics.
Sure. Maybe I'll start with the second, because I do think it applies to the first. I had the privilege of addressing some of your Masters of Science graduates earlier this morning, and I'll share the lessons I shared with them, because I found it helpful in business. I said, 3G. It's a world from my time in the telecoms industry, but in this case, be global, be generous, and be grateful. And that's sort of a business advice that I would have given myself when I was getting a master's at a business university 35 years ago. With the world, for better or for worse, is global. Now, that term has gotten challenging because of the inequality and the climate issues. But for us as individuals to continue to embrace being global in the right way, I feel is an important thing for any graduate, whether it's business degrees. The second I said was be generous. Even the comments I had about Bain, the heart of it, we call it, I mentioned the culture of the firm. One of our operating principles is a Bainey never lets another Bainey fail. We are generous in our talent and our time coaching and mentoring others because others coached and mentored us. And I do think generosity contributes directly to the talent loyalty, which I talked about, which contributes to customer loyalty. And I said, okay, be global, be generous. That gives you success. Those are probably pretty good tips for success in business. But I felt the third was to be grateful. I've gone through ups and downs in my life. I'm sure I was able to become the managing partner of Bain. I was bypassed before that, by the way. And I've had lots of issues where I didn't get to the school I wanted, the job I wanted, the project I wanted. And even my lessons from my youth of, you can connect this to the Kings in common. Be grateful for what you have, as opposed to spending all your time, I wish I had something else. I wish my country won the Euro. Well, Spain won, that's okay, congratulations. But be grateful for whatever team. And I found that a spirit of grace and gratitude, and they're related. And to your first question, I think the generosity and the gratitude and grace, you apply to your life. By the nature of our conversation, we'll talk about business. And of course, I'm grateful for having a successful business career, but that's just a part of your life. The definition of our success, I like to think, is, are you a good man? Are you a good citizen? And and if I followed the life cycle, was I a good son to my parents? Was I a good sibling to my brothers? The most important, have I been a good husband and a good father? And my wife, Lyra, we've been married 36 years. We raised 4 children who, so far so good. They're all productive.
I am 1 year less and 1 children less.
Oh, okay.
So 35 and 3.
Congratulations. So isn't that what defines our success? So anything we've done in business has to be put in perspective of, are we making the rest of the life happen? And that comes down to intentionality of choices we make in how we spend our time, where we go, what extra trip do we make, when do we come home, when can your family work with you to travel? My wife is more accomplished than I am, but she's been great enough to say, we'll be partners on this. And in fact, my wife and 3 of my 4 kids are traveling me over the course of these next few weeks. And so for me, just don't lose that perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Manny. It has been a pleasure sharing this conversation with you. Thank you very much.
It's been my honor.
Thank you.
You.